Hello! We are finally here at the final part of the DMK series, which is part 3. My dear viewers, I really appreciate it if you could subscribe to my channel by clicking the subscribe button. And if you like the content of this video, then please click the like button and feel free to share this video with your friends and anyone else who needs this. In this video, we are going to focus on two final important events. The first one is dinner with the Shermus. This is just a small event, but actually it's very important. We will see later. And the final important event is the death of Mr. Kilmer. This is the climax and the end of the content of this novel. Dinner with the Shermus happened right after the Liberty Bonds incident. So Richard was invited by the Shermus for dinner at their house. At their house, at the Shermus house, Richard met Hannah's parents. So Mr. Shermus' name is Johan, and the mother, Hannah's mother or Mrs. Shermer, is Frida. Okay, I'm not sure whether it's Johann or Johann, but I think it's Johann because, German. And the Shermans appreciate arts, history, and music. Why is this important? Because Richard also shared the same interests. You must remember, from the start of the novel, in the previous two videos, I have mentioned that Richard is a misfit, a social misfit in Turtle Lake, because he was so much different from other people. His interest was different, and this is his interest. Arts, history, and music. People with low income, from lower social background, such as farmers, they don't really appreciate arts, history, and music. They probably do, but then arts and history is not something for people who are undereducated, not yang kurang berpendidikan. So Richard shared the same interest as the Shermers. This makes Richard, when he went to the Shermers' house, he felt just like home. Dia rasa macam ada di rumah dia sendiri. He felt like home. He felt like that's where he belongs. And Richard also learned more about the Shermers. What is it about the Sheamus that he learned? The first one is that they were not originally from Turtle Lake, right? Mr. and Mrs. Sheamus originally came from German. They are German, and then they migrate to America. So they were immigrants. Okay, they were immigrants, and then they stayed somewhere else. And then later on, a few years back, then they came to Turtle Lake. So they were not originally from Turtle Lake, meaning they were not Turtle Lake people, right? But now they are staying in Turtle Lake. And the other one is Hannah has a brother. His brother's name is Otto. So Otto is Hannah's brother. He also joined the American army, just like Mr. Kilmer. After the dinner, Richard went back home, and he has to face something big, right? Ikes Lewis accusations, tuduhan oleh Ike Lewis. So who is Ike Lewis? You see the name Lewis there? Yes, he is Abner's father. So when Richard reached home, what he saw was his father, Pa, was waiting for him. Now let's be honest here. If you go back home late and your father is waiting for you outside the house, what comes to your mind? I'm sure you will think, oh man, I'm dead. Right? Because your father, if he waits for you outside, meaning he has something very serious, he has something, he might get mad at you. So Richard was the same. Pa was waiting for him outside the house. because there was something very important that he wanted to discuss with Richard. So the reason was because Ike Lewis came to Sipa and he complained about Richard, right? He complained about Richard. So what did he complain about? The first one, he accused that Richard sided with the Sheamus. Dia kata Richard menyebelahi the Sheamus, sokong the Sheamus. Right? He also accused saying that the Sheamus wanted the Germans to win the war. Remember at that time, the settings, Germany, negara Jerman was at war with America, berperang dengan Amerika. And Ike Lewis, being not very well educated, he made accusation. Dia tuduh kata because the Shermus are Germans, kerana mereka orang Jerman, so they wanted the Germans to win. Well, this is not right. This is wrong. Because Richard only showed support to his best friend, which is Hannah. Because Hannah was discriminated. Remember in the last video when I described to you about Liberty Bonds incident, when Hannah won the role as Lady Liberty fair and square. She won it fair and square, but nobody clapped hands. In fact, people complain about it. So that's why Richard, being a true friend, he showed support to his best friend, which is Hannah. He did not side with the Germans. Richard is very patriotic. So he did not support the Germans. He support Americans, of course. And the second one, Ike Lewis complained that Richard was unpatriotic. Right? Well, we all know Richard. He is not the kind of person to sit still when something is wrong. He will stand up for what is right. So when he heard that Ike Lewis accused the Sheamus, bercakap buruk tentang the Sheamus, Richard defended them. Richard said that the Sheamus wanted the Allies to win the war. So basically, the Sheamus wanted America to win the war, not Germany. Why is this so? Because even though they are Germans, walaupun berbangsa German, they are still American citizens. So they want America to win. Right? So this shows patriotism. And the next reason, Richard says that they are patriotic. Okay, earlier they wanted Allies to win, so they are patriotic. And what are the evidence that the Shermus are patriotic? The first one is they changed the name of sauerkraut to Liberty cabbage. Sauerkraut is a German food, right? Something like coleslaw, right? Macam coleslaw. It is made of cabbage. So they changed it to Liberty cabbage, right? The word liberty there, remember the word liberty represents America itself, right? The word liberty, which means freedom, because America is also known as land of freedom. So you see, they respect America. They respect the country that they are in. And to show patriotism, they changed the name of sauerkraut to Liberty cabbage. Another evidence is they also ate small portions of meat during the dinner. So when Richard went to the dinner, they ate small portions of meat, sikit saja daging, when they could actually afford more. Remember, I told you in my previous videos that the Shermus are different from people in Turtle Lake, because people in Turtle Lake are farmers. They are not rich. They may have land, but then keuntungan, all those, everything depends on the season. Kalau musim menuai tak elok, then maybe they don't have much to eat. But then the Shermus are traders. Mereka ni peniaga. Traders always make money. So they have lots of money. But then because other people in Turtle Lake at that time, they were suffering, or rather they were all enduring the war, right? Hidup susah semasa peperangan. So the Shermus, they were not any different. They also want to share the pain. They also wanted to experience what other people experience. Isn't that patriotic? Right. And finally, Richard also told Pa that Otto, the Sherman's son, and also Hannah's brother, joined the army and he was an American soldier. And this, if not anything else, this is the sign of patriotism. When you join the army to defend your country during a war, how can anyone calls you a traitor? Obviously, you are patriotic, you love your country, or else you wouldn't want to sacrifice yourself for the country. Pa being influenced by Ike Lewis and looking at how Richard defended strangers like the Shermus, he was worried about Richard. So Pa gave advice to Richard. He reminded Richard that the first one is not to side with the Shermus. Why is this so? Because the Shermus are different from other people in the lake. And we have seen the difference as I have mentioned before. The first one is because the Shermus are not people from the lake. They are not from there. They came from somewhere else. And number two is because the Shermas are different in terms of race. They are Germans with different culture, not like other people in the lake. And the second one is Pa reminded Richard that Ike Lewis and other folks had helped them before. So here it shows that Pa thinks about the neighbors. Terhutang budi. So Ike Lewis used to help Pa when Pa broke his leg a few years back. We don't know when. It was not mentioned. And Ike Lewis and the other neighbors helped the Knight family to harvest the crops. Right? So this is about living in a neighborhood. Hidup semangat kejiranan, which is good thing. But then you tend to feel uh, terhutang budi with other people, which is not a bad thing actually, because it makes you want to do good things to others. And the last one is Pa reminded Richard to fit in with community. Remember, Richard is a social misfit because he does not fit in. And Pa also reminded Richard not to stand above anybody else. Jangan rasa diri hebat sangat. Jangan rasa diri ni, terlalu hebat. Because Richard was different from others. He loves being different. It's just that he enjoys being himself. Okay, so these are Pa's advice to Richard. So why the dinner with Sheamus is important? It is just a small event. However, it stems from other event, which is Liberty Bonds incident, and it actually explains many things in the novel that we have not understood before. So this event shows how easily people can be influenced to believe something untrue. And we have seen how Pa being told by Ike Lewis, he believed Ike Lewis. Doesn't mean that he doesn't believe Richard, but he believed, his friend, Ike Lewis. So if Pa can easily trust and believe Ike Lewis for something untrue like that, so it shows that how other people in Turtle Lake, who are not very well educated, can also be easily influenced by propaganda. Propaganda to hate Germans. So this is like the micro of what can happen. And if we look at it, we can see how the bigger picture works. Kalau seorang boleh percaya percaya perkara-perkara tak betul yang diberitahu, tak mustahil orang lain pun boleh jadi macam tu. Okay, and then the next one, it also highlights how Richard resonates more with the Shermus. So here we can see that, earlier we have seen that Richard was different. But why was he different? Now we can see that it's because it's not that he is weird. It's just that he, whatever his interest is, does not fit in with the other Turtleic people. Instead, he fits in with the Shermus. He feels like home when he was with the Shermus. And we often sometimes feel that way. Sometimes we live in a community, we live with, certain people, and we don't feel right in. We don't feel that we can fit in. But then we may find people whom we can fit in just fine, perfectly fine. Those are our people. So our people doesn't have to be in terms of race. Tak perlu sama bangsa, tak perlu sama, no, not necessarily. It can be in terms of interest. So it's not wrong. So this event, wants to highlight that it's okay to be different with your people, because you will find, other people who will fit right in with you, right? And the next one is, this event also highlights that Richard was brave to stand up for what is right, and we have seen how Richard defended the Sheamus. It was very brave of Richard to do that. It is because not many of us are brave enough to stand up for people, who have been discriminated by others. Sometimes we see bad things, negative things happening around us. We hate it. We don't like it. But how many of us have the courage, have the bravery to stop it, to tell that, hey, that is wrong. This is the right thing to do. Even I may not have that same courage. So this event highlights that Richard's bravery, Richard has the bravery to stand up for what is right. And we can learn something from there. And here we are at the final event, the final biggest event in this novel, the death of Mr. Kilmer. This will be a long event, very sad event, in fact. Okay, so it all started when Richard received a letter from Mr. Kilmer. This is in chapter 9, right? So one day, Richard received a letter from Mr. Kilmer, and in that letter, among other things, Mr. Kilmer wrote something very important. He wrote that poets play an important part in the world. So Mr. Kilmer said that, poets penting di dunia ni. Ada peranan dia. But what is it? Yes, you wonder about it too, right? Imagine what, a new and upcoming poet like Richard feels. He was curious too. So what he did was he wrote a reply. He wrote a reply and he wanted to send it to Mr. Kilmer as soon as possible, as quickly as possible. So what did he do? He went to the post office to send a letter. This might sound normal to you, but then back then, during those days, if you want to send a letter, you just leave your letter in your mailbox. And the postman, when they deliver letters to you, they will pick up letters that you want to send. But Richard doesn't want to wait for that. Instead, he went straight away to the post office. So here we can see how urgent Richard wants to know the answer. In today's world, in today's age, what we can do is, we quickly reply to WhatsApp or Telegram messages. But during those days, they communicate with one another with letters, and what they can do is write a reply as soon as possible. On Richard's way to the post office, he had to go through the Shermus house. And when he did, Hannah called out to him. Hannah panggil Richard. Hey Richard, come here. There's something I need to tell you. So what is it that Hannah told Richard? He told Richard about Mr. Kilmer's death. So she showed a newspaper, that day's newspaper, to Richard. And in the news, it says that Mr. Kilmer was shot in the head. It was a headshot. Very tragic death. In fact, that is that is how Mr. Kilmer was killed in reality, right? That's how he was really killed. You can search on Google for that. And Richard, he was devastated. To say that he was sad is an understatement. He was devastated. Devastated means very, very sad. So sad to hear that. Can you imagine it? If you have not lost a person close to you, you may not understand. Right? So Richard, when he lost his best friend, the first person who understands him, he was so sad that he couldn't cry. Right? He couldn't cry. There was no tears. This is something that I personally have experienced it. Okay, I have experienced it. I have gone through this. When my mother passed away, I was so deep in emotion, I didn't know what I was feeling. And there was no tears. At least for the first few hours, there was no tears. Because I did not understand what was that feeling. Was it sadness? Was it loneliness? I didn't know. But when I got to be alone, tears came down like a downpour. Macam hujan lebat dia turun. Right? And that's what happened to Richard actually. But, when he was devastated right now, he was blaming himself. This is very ridiculous. This is very ridiculous actually. He blamed himself for Mr. Kilmer's death. When something very unexpected happened to you, you will find someone to blame. You will find someone to blame. And if you can't find someone to blame, you end up blaming yourself. So in this event, Richard blamed himself. Why? Because in the letter earlier, Mr. Kilmer said that poets can play an important role in the world. But Richard, he thinks that he does not play any important role. He blames himself. The thing is, people who feels the most always blame themselves first. Right? So Richard blamed himself for Mr. Kilmer's death. He swore to stop writing poetry. Right? Why? Because he believes that poetry did not stop Mr. Kilmer from being killed. And he thinks that poetry also could not stop the war. This is actually very ridiculous. But this is something normal. Because when you are devastated by a loss, kamu kehilangan seseorang yang sangat bermakna untuk diri kamu, you will go through this. You will go through this, believe me. And, when you are in that state where you are so sad, you are so devastated that you couldn't cry, you are at your worst and you will do things that you will regret. And you will think irrationally, just like Richard. He blamed himself. If you have never been in Richard's situation, you would think that, hey Richard, that is so stupid. Why are you blaming yourself? But if you put yourself in Richard's shoes, you will understand. Because he couldn't blame anybody else. He does not even know who to blame. So, at the end, he blamed himself. Maybe that's the best way to make himself feel better. As I said earlier, When you are so devastated, when you are so sad that you couldn't cry, it will happen to you for a few hours or maybe days. I have experienced it before, and for me, it was a few hours. And the same with Richard. He was so sad. But then, when he finally came to term, when he finally understood his feelings, he began to cry. And that happened on his favorite oak tree. This oak tree had been mentioned in the novel a few times because this is where Richard would sit alone, to calm himself down, to collect his thought. This is where his favorite spot where he loves to chill, to relax, to maybe get some ideas. He used to sit there and look at trains passing by. And when Richard went to his favorite spot, he cried, and he cried alone. Remember earlier, Richard promised to himself, Richard swore, dia bersumpah, dia berjanji, he would not write any more poem. But as a poet, you don't really write a poem. Poems come to you. I know, because I am a poet myself, right? So the poem come to him. So when he was sitting alone, crying, he thought of a poem as tribute for Mr. Kilmer, sebagai tanda kenangan, sebagai peringatan kepada Mr. Kilmer. And the title was In Memory of Sergeant Joyce Kilmer. Richard has nobody to show the poem, not Pa, not Angie, because they wouldn't understand. The only people other than Mr. Kilmer, who is now dead, who understand about his interest in poetry are the Sheamus. So Richard showed the poem to the Sheamus. The Sheamus understood Richard's feelings. They were sad with Mr. Kilmer's death as well. So they told Richard, they suggest to Richard to publish the poem in Turtle Lake Weekly. Turtle Lake Weekly is a local newspaper. When the Shermus suggested this to Richard, at first, Richard was reluctant. Dia tak mau publish the poem. Why? Because he was thinking about Pa. See, even though he was so sad, he still thinks about other people. That's how thoughtful Richard is. So he thought about Pa. He didn't want to be an embarrassment. He did not want to embarrass Pa with his poem. At least that's what he thought. So, at first he was reluctant. Dia tak nak publish poem tu. But then, the Shermers, they understood about Richard's feelings. They knew that Richard want this poem to be read by others. That's what poets do. We write poems and we want others to read and understand our poetry. Right? So, they persuaded Richard, diorang pujuk Richard untuk publish the poem. And Richard followed their advice. Richard gave in to their persuasion, to their request. The next day or a few days later, Richard found that his poem was published in the newspaper. Now Richard again felt afraid that he would embarrass Pa. He was ready, actually, to be scolded by Pa. He was ready to get scolded. But somehow Pa wasn't angry when he read the poem. In fact, when Pa saw the newspaper about Mr. Kilmer's death, the first thing Pa did was Pa went to look for Richard. Pa went to look for Richard and Pa asked, Richard, do you know about your friend? That he died on the battlefield? And Richard said yes, he knew about it. And when Pa read Richard's poem, he was touched by Richard's poem. He was touched by it. Dia terharu, he felt something. And he asked Richard, how did you know? Richard, bagaimana kamu tahu? Hang tahu macam mana, Richard? How did you know? What is it that Pa means? Because when he read Richard's poem, it reminded him of his late brother Roland, Uncle Roland. Because in that poem, there is one phrase that Richard wrote: "A precious little world is dead and gone. A precious little world is dead and gone." Reading Richard's poem made Pa, overcome with emotions. And finally, Pa opened up to Richard. Well, this is a very rare occasion. Jarang-jarang berlaku. Well, let's be honest here. How many of you, have your father talk about their feelings with you? Let's be honest. How many of you? I'm sure not many. Even my father didn't talk much about how he felt or the struggles he went through with me. Not much. But he would talk about memories, yes. But that is quite a rare occasion. And Pa is just like that. Because he was a quiet and reserved man. Right? Especially remember this is in early 1900s. Men were like that. Men were expected not to talk about their feelings. But finally, Pa changed. He talked about his feelings. He told Richard about his feelings. And Pa originally was a quiet and reserved man, and he became even quieter and more reserved after Gus left to join the army. And I will explain this soon, right? So Pa opened up and told Richard about Richard's Uncle Roland, about Pakcik Roland. What happened to Uncle Roland? A few years back, when Pa was much younger, he had a brother named Roland, and this Roland, Uncle Roland, joined the war in Cuba, right? At that time, America joined a war. There was a war in Cuba, and people in Turtle Lake, the young people in Turtle Lake, enlisted in the war. A few people became Marines, and Uncle Roland was the only one who joined the army, not the Marines, right? Tentera darat. The others are tentera laut. And the others came back. And Uncle Roland was the only one who did not return, right? Because Uncle Roland died in Cuba. So when Uncle Roland died in Cuba, of course he was not the only one who died, but probably not many people died. So the newspaper only reported American casualties were slight. Slight meaning sangat sedikit. Casualties meaning kerugian, or about war it means kematian. So kematian untuk pihak Amerika adalah sangat sedikit. Right? That was what was reported in the newspaper. But to Pa, he lost a precious little world. When Uncle Roland died, to Pa, he lost a precious little world. Dunia dia hancur berkecai. He lost it. Hilang dunia dia. Right? And that's exactly what Richard wrote in the poem. And this is why Pa, when he came to Richard after he read the poem, he asked Richard, how did you know? Richard, how did you know about how I felt when Uncle Roland died? Of course, Richard didn't know, but Richard felt the same thing. And this is the importance of poets. I will explain soon. Before Uncle Roland's death, there was a small fight in the Knight's family. It happened when one day Gus came back home and told Pa that he already enlisted to join the army. He told Pa that dia sudah sertai tentera. Pa was worried about Gus because, as we have seen earlier, as I have explained earlier, Pa has lost his brother, and now his own son wanted to join the army. Of course, he doesn't want to lose his own son. It reminded him of Uncle Roland, so he doesn't want the same thing to happen to Gus. But Gus, he was so arrogant and reckless. When Pa said, don't join the army. You might get shot, you might die. And Gus said, don't worry lah, Pa. I am too smart and too tough to die on battlefield. See? Very arrogant. Sombong, belagak, bongkak. Right? So Gus, that's his personality. He always thinks that he is the best. He always thinks that nobody is above him. Right? So when Pa heard this answer, I am too smart and too tough to die on the battlefield, Pa was furious. He was very, very angry. Why? Because to Pa, it felt like Gus was mocking Uncle Roland. Dia macam Gus mempersendakan Uncle Roland. And Pa said this to Gus. So you think that you are too smart and too tough to die on the battlefield. Why? Your Uncle Roland was not smart. Was he not tough? So Pa was very angry, right? Pa didn't allow Gus to go to join the army. But Gus, he is stubborn. He was stubborn, so he left anyway. And this is the reason why I explained earlier that Pa became even quieter and more reserved. Now that Pa has finally, got everything off his chest, the pain, the misery of losing someone who was closest to him, Pa felt better. Pa felt better now, and he began to understand why Richard wrote poem, and he began to accept that Richard wrote poem. So now Richard could write regularly for Turtle Weekly. He can openly write poem. He could openly write poems. In fact, Pa began to appreciate Richard's poems. Remember, earlier, Pa didn't really care about Richard's poems because Pa thought that poetry is a waste of time. But now, Pa began to understand that poetry is important. And not just that he appreciates Richard's poem, he also became a reference. Richard refers to Pa for advice about farming. Why? Because poets normally write about things familiar to them. And Richard, he was a farmer. And as a poet, he writes about farming, something that was closest to him. And at the ending of this novel, when the whole family, now we only have Richard, Pa and Angie, they were sitting for dinner, and suddenly Pa was laughing. Richard and Angie was wondering, Pa, why are you laughing like that? Is there something funny? And Pa told them that he was reminded of someone who was still training for a war that had ended. Of course, when you enlisted to join the army, you don't simply straight away go to the battlefield. You have to go through training first. And Gus was still at a training camp. He was still training to become a soldier. But then the war already ended, and Pa was amused. So this is a happy yet funny ending to the novel. So what are the significance of this event? Actually, there are a lot of things, but I want to highlight two things. The first one is this event highlights the importance of poets and poetry. Why? Because everyone feels emotion, everyone feels it, but then not everybody understands the feeling. So, the importance of poets and poetry is in expressing words, the emotions people feel. So, everyone feel, but then not everyone could express it in words. Tell me, when you are sad, what do you do? When you are happy, what do you do? You listen to songs, don't you? When you are sad, you listen to sad songs. You look for songs that resonate with your feelings. When you are happy, you sing happy songs that that showcase your feeling. And songs, my dear viewers, are poetry. The lyrics are poetry. They are only given tunes. So songwriters are actually poets, right? So this is the importance of poets and poetry in the world. And the next one is, this event also shows us that even a distressful situation can turn out positively, can give us positive outcome. Just look at the event. How terrible it was for Richard that Mr. Kilmer died. The first person who understood him is gone, right? Was gone. But as a replacement, now his family became to understand him. Pa, a person closest to him, now understood him. So here, this event tells us that when you lose someone, you may gain someone new, right? Patah tumbuh, hilang berganti, right? I'm not saying that Mr. Kilmer is to be forgotten. No, Mr. Kilmer's loss to Richard is prominent, is something big. It will leave a hole in Richard's life, in Richard's heart. But then, when we lose someone special to us, God always sends someone else into our life. Even something as bad as losing best friend like this, Richard was replaced with a family member who now begins to understand him, who becomes his mentor. So, right, if you are facing a distressful situation now in your life, don't be sad, right? Because with every difficulty, there will be ease. Setiap kesusahan akan ada kesenangan. So, just be patient and remember what happened to Richard. If Richard was so distressed like this, he was so sad like this, but he ended up happy, the same will be with your life. If you are stressed right now, if you are so sad right now, believe me, one day you will be happy. So, what's next? Because we have come to the end of our DMK series. I have given enough analysis for all important events, at least what I think are important. So here are my plans. I plan to make next videos touching on tips and tricks for grammar part in MCQ paper 2 section 1 section A, paper 2 section A, questions number 9 to 15. I have some tricks that I wanted to share with you, and I may also produce a video for tips and tricks for narrative writing. Somebody did ask to make a video for argumentative. However, argumentative is not really my cup of tea, not really my expertise, but I might consider it if I have the time, right? So, what do you think? Do you have any other suggestions? If you do, then please leave your comment and let me know. And that's the end of this video. Thank you for watching, and that's all folks. All the best for your SPM. Bye!